Good evening. My name is Mark Tribe. I am the chair of the MFA Fine Arts Department at the School of Visual Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Fall 2022 talk series. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome our very own Sheila Pepe. Sheila is best known probably for her soft, meshy, cascading installations and sculptures. Her signature technique is crochet, combining domestic and industrial materials. Her practice is, in fact, more wide-ranging than that, but that's what she's best known for. Hopefully we'll see a range tonight. But it's in 3 dimensions. It's often but not always soft in some ways, knitted, crocheted, tied together. In the sculptural vein, and for me also very much engaged with the body in different ways. Many of you saw Sheila's recent 2-person exhibition with her partner Carrie Moyer at the Museum of Art and Design here in New York last spring. Her work is currently on view at the church in Sag Harbor, which is the sort of Unhampton out on the east end of Long Island. And also at the Zimmerli Museum at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where Sheila will be giving a talk soon, in October, to which many of you will be invited. Maybe there'll be a field trip organized. I know Sheila both as an artist and as a peer. Our paths have crossed over the years in various capacities. I think we were on a grant panel once together. Maybe it was Franklin Furnace, I'm not sure. I remember before the pandemic in like 2014 or 2015, getting on a very crowded subway and looking up and finding myself sort of, with our arms interlaced with Sheila and Carrie. And I just, how sometimes you run into somebody you haven't seen in a long time and you can't remember their name? Well, that didn't happen. I said, Sheila Pepe? And she said, yes. And clearly, she was like, who the hell are you? But, I reintroduced myself and we stayed in touch. And then I was very grateful that she accepted my invitation to join our faculty in 2016. Since then, she has taught off and on in various capacities, including as a mentor. And served on our admissions committee and participated in annual reviews. Sheila has taught a lot over the last probably 30 plus years at some places you may have heard of, like Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, Williams College, Williamstown, Mass, Columbia Graduate School of the Arts, Uptown here in New York City, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and Pratt Institute. Sheila received her Master's of Fine Arts at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, now part of Tufts University, and an undergraduate degree, Bachelor's of Fine Arts at Mass College of Art, both in Boston. I think of Sheila as a teacher's teacher, really experienced and skilled at navigating and understanding what students need to meet them where they are, grounded in experience and intuition. Just a great, great teacher. I've learned a lot from teaching beside you, from watching you and listening to you in annual reviews and critiques, sometimes butting heads with you from time to time, because we can disagree and remain friends. That's a wonderful skill that I think Sheila has. Very outspoken, direct, candid, something we share in common, a tendency to maybe be a little blunt sometimes, but always coming from a place of generosity. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Sheila Pepe.
So this will be a talk about my work, but in the past, I've given a lot of talks that are very autobiographical. And this one's different. I got bored with that. I mean, you do this a lot and you get bored with hearing yourself say the same thing. And I think that a lot of that information is now available either online or in books. I'm going to use this to get to know you because I also teach here as much as I think you will get an insight into one, how I think and what I make. So both of those things are really important. And I realized that my older talks are almost always about showing you the kind of practices and imagery and materiality that my work comes up. This is going to be a bit different. So this is me. This is me at a place called Williamsburg, Virginia, in about 1962 or 3. I don't know if you know where Williamsburg, Virginia is, or what might have been on the offering in Williamsburg, Virginia, a kind of a national historical venue in 1962 or 3. But I would guess that it's very different now, because at that time, everything was extremely white. This is me as a member of the Grand Army of the Republic, blue, not gray. And as you can see, I'm sitting on a cannon. Little did they know that I would read this image as Sheila having an enormous phallus. We couldn't have seen that at that time, but now, so many years later, I can read the image that way. I can also read this image by saying it was a photograph taken in the early 60s. There's a certain light characteristic to the print that happened naturally because my father was a bad photographer. That the print had a particular kind of edge, and over the years that white bounding box would change in size and shape, no matter what camera you had. The way prints got made just changed over the years. And behind it, I could see lined paper. And that's me setting it down on a surface to show you that that image, that photograph has been cut, likely by my mother. And why would one cut a photograph like that? Probably because she was on the other side of it and she didn't like the way she looked, or something like that. Something was edited out and I have no recall. I remember being there. I can remember eating pancakes at the Chickahominy house, whatever that was. But I remember those words and that we had pancakes. Okay, so I'm doing right now what we do for each other when we look at images and objects. And this is something that I truly value, that I've spent a long time doing with others and have learned how to do a portion of it for myself in my own studio. One of the reasons why we do this so intently in graduate school isn't necessarily that we continue to do that with others forever in such an inflated way, but because we want to ground that kind of process in our own self-reflected lives, in the studio and in the world. So let's see how we're doing here. I'm going to show you a couple of videos. Both of these artists are artists that were extremely influential in my youth in high school through early college. So I'm showing you this because Ben Shang's life work was my sister and I, older sister and I, were fans of Ben Shang. He had made work in the 40s. He was probably still around, but we were remote from him, and we just simply thought of him as an art hero way before I had that much exposure to anything else. I mean, I was going to the museums here in New York and saw modernism and saw all kinds of things, and the world was opening up when I was in junior high school and high school, and this would have been like 1972 through 77. But this fellow was special because he reflected the values of our family, and he presented something I could see and understand. The other reason why I'm showing you both of this, and I'm going to show you another one, is because listen to the way these people talk about the work. They read the work, they connect the formal issues to events that the artist is referring to contemporaneously with the making. This is not something you can do while you're doing it. It's only done after you do it. And that's really important to know. You can reflect all you want, but you can't forecast this stuff. You can only respond to the moment you are living in. So, what are the important issues for me here is that there are a group of people who are talking to each other, and they are discussing how, as artists, they are going to respond to a condition they're living with. The idea of moving between and from and back again to between representation and abstraction. The use of elements, again, formal elements to get across a sense of sound. I mean, this is all mid-century, 20th century notions of abstraction and representation, 1948, 1967, and it continues through the end of the century. And I would say it continues today. Do we talk about things that way? No, I think about things that way. Can't help but think on the continuum of those issues. The other thing is, I can't help but go back to other references way deeper in my education to understand how is it that I think about this world and the work that I make in it. I think about this guy these days a lot, Socrates. Does anybody here know how Socrates died? That's a real question, not rhetorical. Anybody take a shot back in the back?
Poison.
He was poisoned. Why was he poisoned?
Because of his ideas.
Because of his ideas. There's somebody down in front. What else?
Ideas one of the students gave him the poison to kill himself. So
No, actually, he was on trial by the democracy, meaning everyone who participated in the democracy of Athens could vote. What's that?
Every man.
Every man.
Yeah.
Only the men. That's right. And at this point in the democracy, things had gotten a little conservative. And Socrates was known as someone who loved to ask questions. He was what we call a gadfly. He was blunt. He was in your face. He wouldn't let you off the hook. I mean, he by the time he got to be an older guy, they were making plays that made fun of how onerous Socrates became, because how often he would question everybody's suppositions, everybody's assumption that they knew what they knew. He wanted to know, how did you know what you know? And how did you arrive at that conclusion? Well, he was voted to be put to death because he was a bad influence on the children. So I can identify with Socrates in this way. And he took the hemlock because his own defense was he took it very, I mean, he made almost a joke of it. He said, no, you should be sending me out to dinner every night for being such a service to the state. His student, we'll see later, and talk more about how Socrates gets used in our history. this is the kind of beauty that Greeks were known for. This kind of elegance, not only the ability to sculpt it, but the idea that beyond the skill, that there was an aesthetic that was being arrived at. It was naturalistic, but of course, there are also all kinds of decisions being made about what the actual image of this, I would say, ideal man would have, this ideal warrior would look like. For example, his face there would be eyeballs in there, but his face is his hair incredibly idealized. I mean, I'm not sure if they were doing like wax and stuff, if they had product that were putting in their hair, probably a lot of olive oil or something. But this is an idealized image of a powerful man. He's perfect. On the other side is Socrates. Apparently, it's very frequently reported that Socrates was ugly. Everyone knew that Socrates was ugly. And so this was part of his burden in a world that had strong aesthetic ideals, that he did not look like everybody else. Okay, the School of Athens. Who can identify this painting? Who made this painting? Anybody know?
Raphael.
Yes, Raphael. And it existed as a series of paintings made for the Pope. Made for the Pope in his apartments at a time when the humanities were bubbling forth as part of the Renaissance. So here we have this interesting moment of history when what we would call secular ideas from a pagan past are embraced by a religious ruler. And many theologians for many years have been working very hard to bring all of the teachings of these important philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, the founders of the liberal arts, into the religious, into the canon. They absorb them into the canon in a way that normalizes and forgets what pagan ideas were, and now they're Christian ideas. That's something we do in history all the time. It's part truth, part fiction. So these fellows in the middle are Plato, Socrates' student, and the guy that writes down all of the words that Socrates said, right? And Plato's student, Aristotle. I think Aristotle's on the right and Plato on the left. Aristotle becomes the foundation of science, the sciences. He wrote about everything. Plato writes about everything too, but he's the idealist. He's the man of forms. He's the guy that likes to stay in his head. And way over on the side, I'll go back to here. You see way over on the side over here is Socrates buttonholing somebody and like arguing with him. It's like, he's here, let's put him over on the side. We don't want anybody doing that too much because we'll run into the same problems we did before. What's interesting is then, as ugly and combative, Socrates was this kind of problem figure, he's then embraced and pulled up by revolutionaries. This is one of the greatest examples by David, when Socrates suddenly gets very beautiful and righteous. He has a perfect body. He's dressed in a white toga. Look Look at those legs. It's amazing. Look at his face and his beard. He looks like the other guy. And he gets pulled into the myth making of revolution for France. This is part of our American heritage. This is how Enlightenment thinkers create the world we now live in. A place where mythology is embedded in what we think of as our past. More evidence of that is, for example, you can go into this place at the Met. It's the dining room from Lansdowne, that Lansdowne house. And let's see. Here it is. The plaster work is mostly what was recovered. It was made by Joseph Rose, 1745 to 1799. The designer, 1728 to 1792. You get the kind of bracket dates of those years. Somewhere in between there is 1776. And these folks are living simultaneously with the creation of what we call colonial America, and then after 1776, 1778, 1780, America as its own republic. Republic, a word with a democracy, a word we have taken from the Greeks. That aesthetic is made a constant for America's identity. That we are the only freestanding democracy, a republic, created as an experiment that no one else has. Here's Washington in a toga. I don't think he ever wore one. What is this doing? Somebody tell me, what is happening with this toga? What are they bringing with Washington? They're bringing the nobility, the intelligence, the ancientness of democracy. We happen to only be 5 years old, but we are as old as the Greeks. We know better.
Just to make sure not everybody might know who George Washington is.
Who's George Washington?
President.
He's the first president, but he's also the general. Yeah, he was an amazing general. He was also from the South, as most of the founders were, who were active in the revolution. Slave owner. His teeth were, he had all his teeth pulled out. This is the time when there was no good medicine in the world, okay? There were bloodletting with leeches, and all the other sciences and technologies were far ahead, and medicine was not good. So he had all his teeth removed, and his false teeth were created from a slave's teeth, they pulled the slave's teeth in order to make his false teeth. When we were children, we were told they were wooden. There's a lot of mythology built. Like, anybody ever hear that he cut down a cherry tree? Raise your hand if you heard about the cherry tree. False. Raise your hand if you ever saw pictures of him praying by Valley Forge. Yeah, no, he was a deist. Many of our founders were deists. They thought, we kind of have religion now. A deist is somebody who thinks God just put everything in motion and then just stepped away and said, okay, you guys handle it. Okay, so here's another great American myth, one that touches my heart, because as a small Italian American child, I was taught to revere Christopher Columbus, the Italian that founded our hemisphere. Not so, and to a crazy, let's at least pick as America's Vespucci. All right, we got America. But he didn't even make it to the Northern Hemisphere. He was in the islands south of this part of the continent. He never made it to the mainland of America. So Yeah, why are we claiming it? Because we need to continue this idea of ancientness, of 1492 being the beginning of the United States of America. It's a mythology that is capturing how old and wise we are. So we do this a lot. And we do it through art, which is really fantastic. And how would one know that it's happening? Well, one would know if you could read the art. So this is a man named Joseph Smith, who we'll discuss him, and he's dressed as a sphinx. Where does a sphinx come from? Egypt, old, before the Greeks. We're talking thousands of years old. Joseph Smith is the founder of the Church of the Letter, Church of the LDS, Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormons. This is part of the religion that is a religion made in America. One of the many, but one of the largest and most impressive churches that has been, it doesn't come from Europe, it comes from here and marries all of the secular ideas about being an American, being an entrepreneur, being a pioneer, being, on the land, and these encounters with ancient peoples that induce a kind of revelation for Joseph Smith. More examples of our great, we happen to love to call ourselves the Athens of America. Like every city I know of has called themselves the Athens of America. And what might that mean? Kind of means that you are like wise and ancient, and means that you're a great democracy and you are a greater democracy and more learned and you have more scholars and you've been doing this longer than any other city in America, in the world, perhaps, in the universe. This is Nashville's Parthenon. Parthenon is the great building at the top of the mountain in Athens, Greece, the town, the city of Athens. And this Parthenon was one of the most detailed reproductions, to the degree that I think almost only like 10 years or so, they created an enormous figure of Athena to place in the inner vestibule. And here, and this was a kind of shocking moment when I was researching this, here's the architect who did all the work. Okay. Yeah, now that's just my brain is reeling. Who can read this image for us? Simple identification of parts, and maybe explain a little bit about what's going on here. Who's this guy other than an architect? Yeah, you're good. Somebody else. Who knows? Yeah. He's a Confederate soldier. He's carrying the Confederate flag. He's probably. Yeah. Yeah, who knows what the history is? The battle between the North and the South. The economic split between the North and the South of America. The South wanted to be separate. They didn't want to be told what to do by the North. And one of the issues included whether or not to have saved slavery. It was not the first reason we got into war, but the South wanted to be its own self, its own country. And it didn't want to have to listen to any of these crazy Northerners telling them what to do, telling them how to trade, telling them how to price cotton. They didn't want them to be involved. And they didn't want them telling them who to trade with and who not to trade with. eventually, it became very much about the story of slavery, but it's not how it was originally conceived. So I think one of the outcomes was the abolition of slavery, which is great. And that image of the flag is very hurtful to most Northerners and Black Americans throughout the country. One might say it's also hurtful to anyone in the country who's from immigrant status. So if you were from China, from Italy, if you're Catholic, if you're Jewish, that flag becomes, throughout the course of the 19th and 20th century, a sign of pure Anglo-American heritage. Do you understand that? No. A flag used by the Ku Klux Klan, and a flag now very much in the news today. Thanks for the questions, Mark. They're very helpful. No, it's good. I like this to be conversational now because this is.
Yeah. You just said about the primary and original cause. So that's what I learned too.
Mhm.
Just by the way, research that's pretty debated now, and other people argue that it was the prime thing that the Civil War was fought over. I just want to say that that's not settled right now.
Well, it's not settled, but it's a little chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Because slavery was at that time a really important aspect of business in the American plantation.
Yeah.
Because the labor was so low, it didn't exist. Without slavery, that production was impossible.
Yeah, the whole American economy was built on labor. One of the things. So not everybody may know, but so there was a huge civil war in the United States between 1861 and 1863. Of years.
Yeah.
Like 800,000 soldiers died and lots of slaves. Just so you know, so there was like the late 19th century, mid 19th century, huge civil war. The United States almost fell apart. And some people think we're kind of on the brink of another civil war.
Yeah. But, I mean, I'm trying a lot of things at you, and Mark's helping me kind of draw in some details that you might not know about this country. But a lot of these things will be helpful to you if you research them a little bit, because this is a history that you're kind of inheriting by studying here, right? So this is a way for you to share, a way to communicate between international students and American students. Are there similar situations in the country that you came from? What I'm saying to you is everyone's history and cultural history, as well as political history, is complex and important to your practice.
Also note that in that image, there's a forecast is for that there's a negative or motif of
That's nice.
Roman form,
Yeah.
mosaic pattern, also replicated Greeks.
Yeah. It's interesting that all of that European the cultural heritage was brought to the States from the get-go. There are Italians being brought over to do carving and plaster work in the early 19th century, all along the northern seaboard.
It's also a hand-tinted tintype, probably, or other.
Yeah, you know what, you guys? I'm going to move along. Yeah. I'm going to take the mic back. So here's the real Parthenon, recently reconstructed. I think this is probably, there have been a tremendous amount of work that's been done on it recently. I think it's, and then here is, what is that? It's the United States Supreme Court. Here's another view. So we get where we're coming from, right? We get the aesthetic illusion we are creating. And is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. It is. This is art. If you can read your environment, I hope you can read each other's work. Where does this come from? Why is it being used? What is the artist doing when they use this image? That's Cass Gilbert. He's the architect of the Supreme Court. He's also the architect of the Woolworths building downtown, if you ever get to go down and see it on Broadway. And this is our latest Supreme Court judge. So when we look at each other's work, and when I look at my own work in the studio, I don't ever think, do I like it? I never think, do I like it? Do I like it is beside the point. If that's your first response, okay. And then why? Taste is something to be investigated, not necessarily expressed as a means to pursue a line of work. Observation and analysis. How does this work? How is it making meaning? Not, does it look nice? What does it mean? So we'll just go through these fellows. Remember them? Aristotle, he's the great science guy. He's all about observation. His teacher, Plato, wrote a lot about governments and how governments should be. There are many layers of interpretation. Scholars who are deep interested in this think that Plato knows that he is posing, he understands the questions he's posing to us as provocation, not that he believes, for example, artists should be banned from government, because he clearly is an artist himself in the way he writes. But one of his best examples of a condition of people being inside, in this case, he's talking about democracy, inside of a government, is this story of the cave. Raise up hands. Who knows about the story of the cave? A few people, okay. So this is great illustration, done in a kind of contemporary Greek style by this fellow that has Getty Images. So the prisoner is here, and he's he's supposed to be tied up to this wall where he can't see anything. He can see a wall, and behind him in this big part of the cave, there's a fire, and people back here holding up things are moving along, and all they can see is the shadow in the cave, and they think that's reality. And one day, one of the prisoners gets out and sees the world, and his eyes kind of slowly open because he's in this darkness for so long with only shadows. And he sees that this is overwhelming. This is reality. It's so much bigger. It's so much livelier. There are no shadows. Well, there's some shadows, but not the kind we look at. And he goes back and he tells people, no, this isn't reality. There's something else out there. There are so many times in my life where the work that I made brought me to an understanding that there was something else out there beyond my shadows in the world, okay, right? That there are only one way to look at things, only one view of the world, completely controlled by my ability to move out of the path that I've been on. Like a prisoner. But a prisoner, I don't know I'm a prisoner. I just think I'm here. I think this is real. This is what's going on today. This is it. This is all I know. not really remembering these teachings from my early part of my education. I began in '94 this doppelganger series. Doppelgangers is a German word for doubles, almost like twins, but not birth twins, like lookalikes. And in my mind, what I was trying to convey, and thereby tapping in all of this prior knowledge, all of this structure that I had inherited and worked through without a lot of memory of it. What I was trying to convey was that these two things that I did one day, couldn't figure out why, but I thought there was something in there. They were related, they were doubles. You should see them as the same thing, connected by the small battery operated or electric light I was showing you. I was casting a shadow. The connection is the light and the shadow. And the difference is the drawing that I make inside of that shadow, in and around that shadow, which is figurative and funny and illustrative and happens all at once. First thought, best thought. And on the other side, also made all at once, or in like 10-minute operations, quick, no thinking. Work quickly so the thinking doesn't occur. A pastiche together object, abstract. The entire operation can be understood as a series of moves learned from the surrealists, kind of tapping the energy of this unconscious, but because I don't believe in that, I would say like downloading all of the cultural information I had absorbed until that moment in time. It's in there somewhere, I don't know where it's coming from, because I'm looking at it, I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at all kinds of things from all sorts of eras, and we absorb it. If we keep eating good stuff, and then it comes out. You digest what you can, and the rest of it comes out. Just like in nature. So this became my way of working for a long time. And from this, different bodies of work broke apart and made new bodies of work, as if you say, oh, I love that chicken. That's a very good chicken. It's so fresh. Can I have half of it for my soup? And then you can use the other half for a chicken salad you want to make for lunch tomorrow. And then somebody says, yes, but can I have the neck? I love to eat the neck all by itself. And then somebody else says, well, give me the skin because you're not going to use that in your chicken salad. So I'm going to do something else with the skin. Everything comes apart. They get put to different purposes, and where they land, you then pick up where they land and start again. Is that a good analogy for you? Do you understand how that works? You don't plan it, you pitch it. You throw a ball, and where it lands, you go and say, this is my ball. What else should we do with this ball? You don't go back to the beginning and say, well, we were playing this game with the ball. Well, these are new people. This is a new condition. This is a new year. It's still a ball. Let's use it for something else. This is what it looked like in full light. Then I was using battery packs and these little, there was a place called Radio Shack that I went to all the time. Fortunately, there's no more Radio Shack, but I think you can get all the stuff online. Okay. This is a small work inside an entire, much larger installation I'm not showing you right now, but just to keep us on this line of making all these objects in different kind of, some are very, like this one especially is just wood in these funny shapes that are like very kind of minimal, but also inspired by high modernism, but also really tiny. And then inside of these, I start to crochet. It's like one of the many things that I can find in my bag of tricks from home, from the studio. My studio is like a big trash bag. Everything is laid out everywhere. I'm picking and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just crochet a little something here and then keep going. And that eventually turns into this. Through a series of questions, of tests, of what ifs. What if I take the shadows out? What if I make it really big? What if I only buy synthetic materials? What if I think of it as just drawing in space with a big blue crayon, but also reference the neighborhood that I'm living in and working at in my studio? And then say a few things about the organization of the big tent that is that neighborhood. Very segregated, very black and white. And a canal runs through it with tugboats with big ropes on them. And to create a place where you have to look through the screen to see what's on the other side. And I make your space ornamental and maybe too old-fashioned, or maybe too pretty, or you think I'm a spider all the time, or this doesn't really look right, contemporary, sleek, well-made, but it's okay. Somebody's asking me to do this. This is okay. Maybe they will ask again. Here's Cass Gilbert again. So another building Cass Gilbert built was this. This is the Endicott side of the Pioneer Endicott building in St. Louis. Not St. Louis, St. Paul, Minnesota, thanks. And look at the front of that building. Does that remind you of anything? This is years and years before he designs anything else. This is before he's left St. Paul. Before he's left and done big things like the Woolworths building in the Supreme Court. And when they reopened, if you look through that window and you see this arch, there's the arch. So I was there to celebrate and mark and demonstrate, and if you will, infiltrate the building, but demonstrate the nature of the architecture. And say some things through that I can't even unpack because it's too recent. Say some things about the event, the city, and the work probably done in that place. And by the use of title, frame all of that abstraction to ask the audience to think about some things while they're looking and moving through the space. Softly, meaning it's soft material and it's softly we're walking before the Supreme Court. I have to tell you something about the Supreme Court. Everybody know about the Supreme Court in America?
Sure, you're not everybody. Yeah.
Who knows? No, someone from another country. Do you know anything about the Supreme Court of the United States? It's very important. Very important. Roe v. Wade was a very important law that was passed during my time and upheld by the biggest court in the land that said women had the right to an abortion. That women had a private control of their own bodies, so that if they needed to have an abortion for any reason, it was their body and they could decide to do that. That might seem controversial to some people. But it was for many years, since the early 70s, 72, 73, I can't remember. Something, all of the people said, this will never change. This will never change. Recently, this big court said it changed. It has to change. And they changed it. So something that we've been taught is very wise, very slow. The judges go on to the court, and the only time they leave is when they die or they get very old and resign. So something big and slow and wise that would keep things for a long time suddenly got quick and different, and oh my goodness, it seems unreliable to me. In this time, in 2018, I am seeing that this court is changing very quickly, more than it did during my early years. And I feel trouble coming. And I use this time to make different messages. One very soft, very inviting, very sweet, and one very keep in mind softly before. If you get the double meaning, not just before he designs the Supreme Court, but that we would walk softly before the Supreme Court, we should pay attention. Why does that work with my work? Because when you go in it, you have to navigate it. When you go in this, you have to figure out where you are. You're not going to get hooked up by a string. You're going to be looking up in the air, and then suddenly trip on this huge piece of stone that's part of the original foundation. Because you need to work, you need to walk softly as someone inside of the space. And so there are these times in the work where these junctures that are being knotted together for structural integrity. And when I say that, as a matter of interpretation, we might think of structural integrity both as a real thing, a physics thing, and a metaphor for structural integrity. You see how that works? That multiple meanings are being built simultaneously. More is better, in my mind. But also, they're gnarly a little bit. They're unkempt. What does that mean? They're kind of like I just got out of bed. Everything looks a little crazy. Because that's how it is. And so it goes up over what they have in this town. Because it's so cold, they have these skyway walkways on the second floor. And then that's what it looks like from the walkway. And because there are people making humidity downstairs, the glass gets a little misty. Another view from a first floor to something below. This is at the Smith College Museum of Art, made it in 2008, commissioned by them. And in memory, actually not in memory of, but in celebration of someone who was retiring that I had worked with. Mostly celebratory. Many parts are made by the community, these parts on the end. Some of these green things that come down the middle. So there are all these methods used to involve the people on campus, and always this relationship to the shadows, the thing that's there and the thing that is not there. Okay. So here we're going to finally get to this. Here are the old bones. I don't know if any of us have completely recovered from the state of death experienced in COVID. I know I haven't. And I know that even though I couldn't leave where I was in Brooklyn, that I would see these images on the news of so many, and there were many also in my neighborhood in Sunset Park, of all of the people who died and whose bodies were in these boxes, refrigerator boxes. We put them away. They had to be refrigerated, I understand, but we put them away and didn't see them. In earlier plagues, that's an excavation site from the 14th and 15th century, with 2 plagues in France. And that's how people were put into the ground. In this country, we don't think about death. We don't want to think about death. We don't talk about death. We don't think about ancestors unless they're totally fictionalized and we don't know who they are actually. And I think it's a bad thing. I actually have an opinion about this. I think it keeps us away from understanding our own history and also understanding that one day we will all die. We want to be young. We want to be pretty. I don't want to be pretty. It's also a way that we note, because death and how we treat our dead is very important to all of us, I think. Many different cultures, how we treat our dead is important. So this is an American story about how we live with each other. This is New York before 1776, and here is an illustration of the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan. Think of Wall Street, still a wall almost. And this is where the water was. There was a pond for our water there. And just beyond it, which we can't see anymore because this is later, was the burial ground. Also near where the tannery was, which, because tanning hides uses urine, is very smelly and awful. One could imagine that the African burial ground was not in a very pleasant place. It would have been in this section. Here's a more contemporary image. If you go downtown, Reed Street, Duane Street, Chambers Street, if you know those streets, all of these are where there are still people buried under enormous buildings. Okay, this happens all the time. Maybe. It happens in Rome. They try to dig a subway, suddenly they have to stop everything and dig, and then they find somebody from Roman times, and then they get everything in. But not just like 200 years ago. This is Jamestown, the original founders who died. Very beautiful excavation. They find this. A silver box. There's a lot here that I want to explain. You have to ask me later to explain it, okay? But these are people who are not Catholic. No. They are from the British king, and the British king is the head of his own church. the English Church of Episcopalians. They do not like ornamentation. They do not like any of the pagan rituals that the Roman Catholics use, like glass and putting water everywhere and calling it holy and doing all these things that seem not of the scripture. And yet, when the archaeologists look inside, what do they find? But a little bottle that was traditionally hold holy water, and something that looked like a relic from a saint. This is taboo. And we think, oh, maybe these people were who we thought they were. I come from a culture where the relic is primary. Whether it's religious or pagan, I don't mind. This is my culture. You live with small statues. You live with small pieces of the past. They help you look for the future. They are relational objects. And that's a term that we use in art that is a psychological term. Winnicott is philosopher, as a psycho, he's a shrink. That is especially useful in our profession. And these are some of the votive moderns, meaning I'm making votives, but they're all coming out of modernism. And I've been making them since 2014. 2014, since 1994. So now, and we're close to the end, and I think you're probably happy. This issue of religion is very important in our world right now, in America in particular. And right now, this is where you're living. And it's a very interesting conversation. Everyone comes with some belief, either philosophical or religious or both. It doesn't really matter. It's how you think about the world, how you've been taught to think about the world, what you think, and when you check it, you realize, oh, I don't actually think that anymore. I think something else. But this is the baggage. If I don't look carefully at it, I won't know. Right? This is, how do I know what I know? Well, of course, there are certain things that are true. Oh, wait, I don't think that anymore. That's just something else. Still, I don't believe that these bones do anything but that they're bones. I just love the bones. I think it's an amazing human activity of craft and veneration that comes from very deep in our histories. In 7000 BC, in Turkey, there's a place called Çatalhöyük, and they found people buried under the beds, the sleeping place of the inhabitants. They would bury their family under them to sleep with them. And when they thought they had only bones, they would take the bones out and use them in their house for veneration. I think that's very smart. It's very un-American to think about looking at your ancestor bones in your living room. It's also not so popular to think about kneeling down to pray, but I think this is interesting. American Bardo. There are so many things Americans could get on their knees for, right? And then, no religion at all. I think, wow, how many people kneeled over the course of all ages, and where did they do it? Well, the Catholics kneel, some Protestants kneel. I know that before the emperor in China, one knelt to kowtow to give them honor to the emperor. I've seen Buddhists kneeling and walking and kneeling and walking and laying down. I've seen Mexicans on pilgrimage walking on their knees. So this is a big thing in different cultures. Right? So that's the kneeler. And Bardo, anybody know what Bardo is? According to the Tibetan Buddhists, it's about 40 some days between death and reincarnation, when, to put it simply, one still has the opportunity for gaining enlightenment. And so this series, which will probably happen over a long period of time, is my love letter to America, North America, the United States of America, saying, you still have time to become enlightened. Maybe we should all get on our knees for something. I use various craft and aesthetic decisions, some decoration methods used in the Lower Side in tenements, some high modernist, some from Italy. This is a doorknob from Italy. Some like building blocks that are fake building blocks from the Bauhaus. Then there is what I call a little change or change tray or a place to put your phone, because while you're praying, they might get in the way. And I like this idea because I always like the haberdashery trees that my father had, and they had a place for his pendants. The second one, American Bardo 2.0, is a specifically love letter to China. These are 1840 carved wood table parts that I found in the dumpster. And they're turned upside down to make this kneeler, just like the British and the Americans turned Guangzhou, what was then called Canton, turned it upside down with opium. And so this big cushion made from material, to me, looks like a horse blanket, has on it my putting together of the East India bale mark for opium and the Astor beaver. When you go to Astor Place subway, there are beavers just like this, because the Astors were very important people. They owned lots of land. They were very important beginning in the 1700s, and then made a lot of money selling Turkish opium in China. And they bought the opium with beaver pelts. They did not sell beaver pelts to China because China didn't want them. But they sold opium instead. And so the Astors made a tremendous amount of money, stopped selling opium, and used that big money to buy real estate all over Manhattan. Here they are. That's where we kneel. And then this is the original carving, which took a lot of work to bring it back. It was not in good shape. And then this is an example of a kind of what we now call DIY art, or embellishment, also found in what we call holo art, it's American style artwork. And then this is the reason why everyone should go to Chatham Square. This is the man that fought with the British for the most part and caused the war. The British came back with very big guns and was not a pretty story. And we finished today with not the old bones of Europe. So this is an incredibly beautiful picture of one that's on a tortoise shell. And it's the bottom, you imagine a tortoise, a turtle, and the bottom of the shell, the breast part of the shell is where. And I've read articles that say that they now teach children from the characters that are, you can best see the evolution of the language, the writing. They begin to teach children about this ancient writing. That's the first step to writing the language. I can't imagine having a language that is original roots, is that old, and still resembles itself. This is something completely foreign to my experience, and it makes me very alert to how short my conception of time is. And it makes me want to stretch my conception of time. Lastly, my message in my desire with my work and my teaching is the same, is to become alert and aware of the world we live in and the worlds we've come from. This class or these classes of students are coming from all over the world. And the dialogue between and among us can only be rich if we know about what that is, where that is, and become curious about each other and these places. Living in New York is extremely fun and tempting and wonderful and scary and expensive. But talk is free. Hanging out with each other is free. And crossing boundaries of sameness to embrace difference is one of the greatest opportunities you have here. Please embrace it. It's so rare and so rich. Please embrace it. Questions?
I actually have a question about your recent collaboration with the artist, right?
Yeah.
I was wondering, after collaboration with the artist, your friend, like how did you experience like that, like moment?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Carrie is not just my friend, she's my wife. This year, this week, 24 years together. Oh my God. We got married only in 2014 when the law said you could get married. So we made it official. But it doesn't matter, except the government will give you some allowances to be married. It was great. We've done this before. We know this is why it works. There are lots of things she can do I can't do, and there are lots of things I can do that she can't do. And so we need to keep it. We speak the same language in terms of and we're thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, that's great. She's a painter, I'm not a painter. I draw, and I'm a sculptor. So she likes to draw too, but the way she does art, she works with shapes of color, and she does line this kind of thing. But I'm crazy with the line in 3 dimensions and in 2 dimensions. So it works out real well, and we have fun because if you're working, this is like what I grew up with. I grew up in a family business. So you learn, you know, you're working side by side, you know what each part of what you need to do is, and you're quietly working, or you listen to a story. A lot of the time we're listening to this, like, a story about something and working on it. It was great. It's very intense living with another artist. It's great that we don't make the same kind of mess. Because I can't imagine. We have friends who are both painters. That would drive me crazy. Because you're competitive with each other. But you're also supportive of each other. You understand. Like you say, I love you dearly. It's your birthday, but can't we just go to the studio? And then it works out. Both of us are like, okay, let's just do something special later. Thanks. Well, there was one here, and then we'll go there.
Okay,
Yes. The drawing, it's because to make it special, I went those old, until there was color photography, there was a lot of hand coloring to make it special. So the photograph in black and white would have been this flag, but then because someone loves the flag, they go in and put the actual colors in paint. It's very common and very interesting embellishment. That makes sense. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all your work. Interesting in your reports that it resonated more that work that I'm trying to do, especially the social topics that resonate and they seem to be piling up around us with greater momentum. Sometimes I find myself very distracted from exploring one concept, a certain set of material, a certain set of scale, and then I'll move on to something else. I saw in your work, some of the timestamps on that are really confirmed. Because Wheeler's and the crochet work and the long breadth of the votives. Do you find, or how do you maintain a focus or a groove on such heavy topics while using such a diverse set of materials and scales? And
well, I've been doing it for a long time. But I was also, my first training for the art school was in a liberal arts, small liberal arts school. There was no way to be specialized. You know, it was huge. And I didn't, at that time in my life, I didn't want to be. I didn't know what I wanted to do, really. And so I took the philosophy and the history. And I mean, that foundation has carried me through my entire life. Now I build in things that I wasn't taught. In a liberal arts education, what you learn most of all is that you can teach yourself, you know how to learn, but you also know that these disparate things, you're in history class here, you're in art history here, you're in science here, oh my goodness, English, this is all happening at the same time. And all the teachers are plugging into you to teach you something that you make the connections with. Making the connections is like our work as humans. So, you know, it helps being both a little ADD and a strong compartmentalizer. Right? Because I'm painting with ideas all over the map. Sometimes it's difficult to listen to me. But at the same time, I've learned to trust my studio completely I just go in there and noodle, and I have to like steal the time. Just because I have to. And I've learned that you just make stuff without any thoughts about what it might be or what it might lead to. Those ideas will be back there no matter what. You need to get them and go into the studio and mess around with things you like or things you saw in a museum or something old, something nobody knows about, something from another country. Make amends later. You know what I mean? You need to be free and observant in your studio. And not thinking about anything in particular. You just need to be a human when you're going
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So, you've known mostly for crochet work, right? Do you get resentful of that because you have all these other pieces that?
Well, the good news is that I had a traveling career show. It didn't come to New York, but most of the work I do is outside the city, and it's always been that way. I mean, I have a habit of just working with whoever wants to work with me. My bottom line is that I can't lose money. Otherwise, we work out something financially. And I'm grateful for all of it. And that show and the catalog that went with it showed all these different things that are happening. So now later in my life, I feel freer to say, yeah, I had done all this stuff. I don't see my work in a chronological way. I see it as like just different pockets of activity, like that ball I was talking about. I think of it as a kitchen. Like I'll always make salads. What am I going to stop making salads someday? Sorry, no more salads for the children. Run out of time for making salads. Or a steak, although those are fewer. You know what I mean? It's like that. I think it's really important to not completely resist the expectations of a market to find the organization of your studio through a dedicated practice and a lot of thinking, introspection, and eating culture and stuff around you. Having opinions, talking to each other, learning another language. I think that trying to learn another language. But yeah, see what I mean? I mean, that's the gift of these 2 years. Is the kind of emerging, the kind of studio time and conversation we can support.
Why don't you talk about how you think about the US?
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, do you have like any ideas about where this approach is from? Like not thinking about just I don't
know. It just seems like the 20th century was such a strange, that's half of my life. I mean, like I was born in 59, so it's 10 years off, but it just seems like everything was about youth and young and old people were weird. And I mean, not with me, we just, I gravitated to the culture I came from. So you find the oldest people with the best information and you sit around and listen to them. That's how I thought. But some of my friends were like that, but we were all strange. Everything was about the youth culture and staying young forever. I mean, just look at the stuff they're trying to sell us, especially women. It's like, it's like there's a time I remember my grandmother was old. She wasn't going to try to get young. This is just the way it goes. She was from another culture. I think it's because it's a young country. I think it's also completely embedded with making things that become obsolete, and so you have to replenish and refresh. And you need to always be buying products to keep you that way, and it's capitalism. And it's a patriarchal capitalism that is mostly focused on women, and now, thanks to the metrosexual, guys can do it too. I love them. But, you know, there are some really interesting pockets of, there's some great documentaries out there about pet funerals and pet grave cemeteries that are really very American in their sensibility. There's one on the Criterion channel, and I think maybe from this, I can't remember the documentarian's name, but it's like, wow. You know, it's also that I was a very assimilated child in the picture. I was a good little American girl from the North. And so when I was very young and the older people died, it was terrifying because people were like screaming. They were being Italian, like screaming and pulling people out of the casket and putting wine in there. Like they were doing these crazy emotional things, and I was just like, wow, people don't act like that at school or at church, because we go to the St. Margaret's of Scotland church. We don't go to the Italian church, right? So assimilation is a very fascinating subject here. I would say resist it. You have to do it because it saved my life. Really. But I think as we mix here together, we trade information about what our families who are from different countries, or you're from a different country, what we think about things like that, like big questions, and then be precise. Well, what do you do? What do you do that's different from what we do? Are you Christian? Are you not Christian? Or is it a philosophy? Or are you super green and you want to have, they have these in the United States, they have these special places where you can go and just put a body wrapped in fabric into the earth without any chemicals or anything, and you just go back into the earth. And that was illegal for a long time, and now there are places. So I find that, and I must say that after COVID, and I had it really bad, I thought, why are we making art? What? You know, I mean, I was like, oh, stop, but you know, like, what? So if you almost kick the bucket, you know, like maybe there's other things I do. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, why do I do this? What is this? What do I think the best art is that I've ever seen? It is actually stuff that they dig out of the earth from ancient times that are very brave goods. And I think, wow, somebody made this and they put it in there for a reason. I think that's why I love Egypt so much. Like, wow, they had such a fantastic idea about what was going to happen. It's like religion is like the best thing that people ever made up. So involving, and it's all art. So that's the kind of art I want to be making and be around. I want to be around that kind of urgency, like it's a matter of life and death. It's not just a matter of fashion, or if I'm cool, or if I'm going to get invited to the right parties. There's too much at stake, it's too expensive. There's no reason to be here other than it's really important. And I think for a lot of you, it is. And it has to do with travel and your lives and taking control of them from wherever you are coming from. We just met. Yeah, I get it. You don't want to stay there. Yeah. Or maybe you do, but yeah. Yes.
What's your view on the spirit of it? Is it possible or and also how to talk about it? All right.
I'm talking about it now. I talk to Barry about it, and I talk to people about it whenever I can. And then, I'm using this forum to talk about it. Because I don't think anything happens. I think what. And in some ways we work as artists to leave something behind. Ironically, much of the work that I made was very big and completely ephemeral. Always testing the limits of invisibility. Like this talk, it's going to get recorded, but still, the conversations that people have in private are mostly where the best people happen. I'm not somebody. So I'm only reporting from the knowledge of other people. I think I'd be a fool to say that I wasn't afraid of it. What I'm mostly concerned about is realizing that I don't have forever in front of me, just because of how old I am and that I was. But that's good.
What do you think that such a lack of conversation regarding death in America as compared to other cultures, and even a lack of a conversation about the past and more about the present and the contemporary? Is it because it's a very new? I mean, it's a very young country, or do you think there are other factors to it?
My experience is that there's not. I can tell you a story that's not about that at all. But when I was very young and just starting to vote, and my dad sat me down. It's like I didn't have the sex conversation with my parents. I had the voting conversation. And my dad said, okay, he told me how he votes, registers for the local stuff and then for the state stuff. And he said, well, when it comes to president, Sheila, you only have one job, no matter what they say. Your only job is to protect the Supreme Court. Because we've always run out of court like this. I would tell my friends when they were voting for mayor or they were going and they were doing splitting votes and doing things that I thought were not strategic enough to protect the court. I said, you guys, this is how it works. And they're like, okay, it's stupid. That's just old fashioned. That it doesn't work like that. We have to get more progressive. And I ran my group and got upset, and guess what? My father was right. My father was right. To have a long view and know one's place in it is very difficult in this country. Because no one I know really thinks that way. Like we're a tiny thing in this universe, in this big world, and we are not everything, and we won't be everything forever. We don't know much about the rest of you, to be honest. But because my commitment to my family that I could do nothing for in the terms they wanted, I can only do in a sense of respect for the ones that got me here that I don't know. And right now our country is in a very difficult place in being able to talk seriously about and honestly without a lot of judgment about who we were, where we came from, how I got white. When my grandparents came here, they were not white. And my parents worked very hard to get white, and now I'm white. And I know how it happened. I only know that because of history. People from other countries, where are you from? Okay. How many generations were your family from there? How many generations back were your family from Iran? How many? I don't know. So many. But you don't know. But everyone on this continent knows. Okay. Every single one of us, including the indigenous people who knew they were from something, from here. I mean, if they're not curious about where they came from, then they don't know. But there are ways to know. No.
So yeah, I was thinking about it, it's just about,
Yeah.
or maybe it's similar, it's alien, where it's like find out my
Yeah.
origin.
Yeah. I mean, you are an indigenous person in Iran. If I moved to Iran, I would be an immigrant. So most Europeans, most Asians, most people from every other continent in this world are likely indigenous to where they're born. Doesn't that just blow your mind? I don't know. The Americans, doesn't that blow your mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what's that?
Americans are like,
Yeah, where do we look? You think we know, like, other place. There's somebody back there.
Good. I want to like press you a little bit.
Yeah,
Press me a lot.
good, bring it.
Like, and you said you precisely thinking about it. So like, I think like really knowledge and put that in stage.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of communities here that are half each other. You won't see it happen. You don't think of a community.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so like, I find it a little bit strange to like generalize the American how we treat death with this broad umbrella.
You're absolutely right.
Because like in my community, we treat that very, very seriously, very controlled. There's a lot of things happening.
But I would say because your community there are many communities in this country that keep traditions that are not from America. They keep traditions that are ancient from the lands they come from. Your community, Sparta, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's crazy when you think about, you're talking about centuries ago in the Levant, and then likely and in Andalusia, and then early come to this country, extremely early, and then in periods afterwards. But my experience is that, for example, whether you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi, the Jewish friends that I have, they have traditions. I feel like I sound like the show, tradition, but they know their culture intimately because it's, even if they're not religious, they have held their culture in high esteem and their ancestors because of it. And they're very important things one needs to know in Judaism about burial rituals. I mean, it's.
Yeah,
So-
I was trying to say it, but I'm still American. I'm American.
I know.
Figured out. We're keeping our. We're doing it.
Okay.
So like.
You make an exceptional point, but don't you not feel like you're part of a minority? Do you look out into the expanse of the intranet and see that this is what, I don't know, maybe your algorithm is sending you tons of stuff about,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you see reflected back? Is it you feel like the main culture that we live in is saying, yeah, we should get on board with that.
No, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying, but, just generalizing treating death in America as an American problem, all this feels like too broad of interpretation.
But what I'm saying is, it's not part of the mainstream culture. And I have to say that my stubbornness about paying attention to the mainstream culture is that I come from a time when you looked at everything and you created an amalgam because there were certain forces pushing you into a centric place, into a center of belonging. We have lots of little parts that we're a lot aware of now. And the issues of belonging are strange and very divisive. Like, we don't know about each other. Like, we don't need to know about each other because we have our own self-centering feed coming from our media. Yeah.
This is such an important topic. And just that was one of the most brilliant lectures I have ever heard. And I heard that 160 of them. It's not this thing of assimilation word you used earlier, where people praise or let go of parts of their cultural identity and heritage. You let go of parts of it in exchange for a kind of belonging in this less specific community. And that assimilation is a word for it that we use melting pot. Like you talked about chicken before. It's like you put a chicken in and it becomes chicken soup. It's no longer.
The thing is,
for Jews and it's all of the.
Here's the problem, and this is where I agree with my colleague. If I did not assimilate and learn the ways, I wouldn't have been able to come out. I would be dead or buried. I'd be like 300 pounds with a guy that would beat me up. It's like I would have a radically different life. So there was a certain amount of that assimilation.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
To some extent. Just to finish the thought.
Yeah.
So assimilation was this big trend in America and in Europe for most of the 19th to 20th centuries. More recently, however, since say the 1980s, there's been a countervailing trend of multiculturalism, particularly in Canada, that you see also reflected in the tribal nationalistic identitarianism that's rising in Europe and elsewhere. So there's a kind of conflict in these two historical trends: assimilation, letting go of ethnic and linguistic specificity and assimilating, versus a kind of reassertion of identitarian specificity and a celebration of difference, so that we can come together, celebrate each other's differences, and not require people to do that kind of trade, to sacrifice their language and their culture for belonging. We want to be able to have both.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we're in such a new place in so many ways. My concern is as much about empowering you all to be curious about each other, to argue with each other. Fantastic. To these aren't everyone's cultural values, but this is a point of assimilation. This is why I show you the Greeks. That is so much a part of the civic space, of the shared space of the city, the country, and this education. Right? This is not a how to become a great artist only place, because there is no such education in the world, as far as we're concerned. We can't teach you how to do certain things. We can't teach you how to have an opinion, a point of view, a love of objects, a love of history. Right? Do you agree with that?
We can model it.
We can model it. That's what we need to do. But I feel like it's important to say it out loud. And, I'm saying this to the women I'm looking at here. I'm also saying it to the guys. I see that there where it's like, yeah, I'm here for you too. I'd love to argue with you. Like, I'm all about going somewhere else. This winter I'm going to, where did I say? I'm going to Columbus, Georgia. I've been there for site visit to do big piece about the textile industry. That's going to be complicated. Well, not about, but in relationships. So, very complex. And how do you work inside of, this is why I like to go places, work inside of a place that I am not the authority. You know, because you can see here in this room, I feel emboldened to be there. I can't help it, it's my age, it's my point of view, it's my sense of urgency. You understand that? So I think that's all I have to say. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to know more about your position or opinion about aesthetics of beauty,
Aesthetics of beauty.
because yours seems to have very and also you feel like I talk about Sukhat when he was here. One and the other was more lately. So I wanted to know a bit more about what you
So Socrates, you
No,
know,
that was just the example you showed. But I wanted to have your opinion and discussion about it. Yeah, because we seem also to be checked.
Yeah. So my adulthood as an artist happened when beauty was being contested. Like also, and so I thought that was fun. The craft was the thing, like what I make out of a craft, the crochet, like my mother's craft, was taboo, but high craft is good or bad. I mean, it shifts every 10 years or 20 years in the city or whatever. Or now you can find pockets in different places. No handmaking. This group, only handmaking in this group. You know, there are so many aesthetic positions to take if you're working conceptually. It's mind blowing, right? My only answer to that is to ground myself in the experience of my era. What have I had the most in-person, moving, and when have I said, ew, and then been like, oh, I didn't understand it. It's great, I just didn't know how to read it. How many epiphanies of that time have I had over the years? And when is something ugly and when is something beautiful? And guess what? It's all context. So I choose the aesthetics of my family, mostly, and my education. Because, and then I make things to fill the holes that I don't know yet. To kind of chase my ignorance. Like a lot of times, if I make something new or different, just for myself, if it's kind of ugly, oh, okay, just leave it like that. Don't fix it. Because I know how to fix things for other people. I know how to deliver something that's in communication with a curator or school or some audience that I've chosen to have a more collaborative and copacetic relationship with. Does that make sense? So it's more context. It's what is this for? And now it's time for you to just be about you and figure out You know, if you do something that you truly understand why you do it, and you found all the connections that grounds you and really makes you think, you listen for who says, I love it, I hate it, I love it, I hate it. And then every time that happens, you have to ask why. And listen to what they said. That way, we all learn together about how things work. And when to press each other for more information, or when we trust the person that they just don't know, and they're still finding out. That's what we do for and with each other. Does that make sense? Are you still thinking? I can see. You might have any mind to.
It's above that.
No, not about that. You're still thinking about that, the death question.
No,
Yeah. That's good. We don't talk later. Me too. I mean, I think, you know, you shared with me your ethnic, racial identity. And yeah, I think I'm talking about white people.
Right.
Because I'm a white woman and I'm talking for myself. Yeah, I would say Black people in America, I've observed and I get it, have a totally radically different relationship to death. And I'm sorry to be so frank tonight. Yeah. So yeah, when I was a young lesbian, I was more afraid of getting hurt than I do now. I'm starting to be afraid again, but I'm in New York City, so that's why that's why I came to New York City. But it's just a portion of what we see.
Georgia will be interesting.
Yeah, it already is. It is very, and the school is really like, it's art museum and art school. School is really the first thing the kids are quiet. They're like, I'm not polite. And they're just like, yeah, just wait until later. Thanks, you guys, for your patience.